Let's talk about the story in Alan Wake, not the extended universe story of Alan Wake, just the game that came out way back in 2010, the year Fallout New Vegas and the masterpiece movie Dale and Tucker vs. Evil came out.
You guys, going camping?
Alan Wake is a shooty bang bang horror game, or more correctly, a flashy bang shooty bang bang. I've never played the game before, and after playing it, I couldn't help but think of a movie I saw a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
What's the third line? Page 51.
That movie's called The Mothman Prophecies. It came out way back in 2002. It was a moderately received, moderately profitable horror film that had this creeping sense of tension that I've rarely experienced in another movie. The narrative centers around John Klein, played by Richard Gere of all people, a famous journalist whose wife passes away in the first half hour of the film. Klein drives from DC to Virginia, and unexplainably ends up 100 miles away in a small West Virginia town whose residents have been experiencing unexplainable phenomena and who have been seeing a creature who Klein's wife drew before she died. Anyway, the movie's about Klein, a man who values evidence, dealing with the trauma of his lost wife, while all these strange things happen to him in the city around him as he tries to piece together the mystery of what his wife saw. Sound kind of familiar?
Have you started looking for my wife yet?
Roger Ebert had this to say about the mysterious villain in the Mothman Prophecies. The Mothman is singularly ineffective as a threat because it is only vaguely glimpsed, has no nature we can understand, doesn't operate under rules that the story can focus on, and seems to be involved in space-time shifts far beyond its presumed focus. As much as I love Ebert, I have to disagree with him here.
What are you talking about?
I would argue that the Mothman is effective as a threat because of those things. Anyway, there's a bunch of similarities between Alan Wake and the Mothman Prophecies. Klein experiences lost time like Alan Wake. There's a strong woman sheriff. The West Virginia town is quaint and cozy, just like Bright Falls. The main character is a famous writer, and almost the entire movie takes place at night. The real similarity, though, is how both pieces of media are most interesting in the mystery that they create, not necessarily the answers to those mysteries. I mean, why do horror gamers like Silent Hill? It's all the unknown parts of the town. It's all that lore and world building that isn't explained to us, that's left to our imagination. In writing, one of the differences between horror and fantasy is that in fantasy you know the rules of the world. In horror, you don't.
I've been expecting you. It was foretold by gyromancy.
Alan Wake starts the way the Mothman Prophecies starts. After their wives have disappeared, both Klein and Wake's cars crash. Both experience time loss and are trying to figure out what the hell is going on. Is there any significance to these similarities? The Mothman Prophecies did come out a decade before Alan Wake. Sadly, a Google search failed me. The only connection I could find between the two was a post on the Alan Wake subreddit, where a user asked if there were any movies like Alan Wake, and I found a single comment by user Nepa, I don't know.
You're not very bright, are you?
Anyway, this guy who recommended the film. So maybe I've got my tinfoil hat pulled down too tight over my head, but there's some kind of connection between these stories. So after this confusing tutorial, in which questions are raised and not answered, which isn't a bad thing, we see that our protagonist is a very successful writer with a bad case of writer's block. He's on a vacation with his wife Alice. Okay, let's just stop now and talk about the importance of names in this game. You should be putting on your tinfoil hat for everyone's name. We've got a protagonist who lives by their imagination whose last name is Wake. His wife's name is Alice. Who's the most famous Alice? Oh yeah, her. Note too about Alan Wake that it can be read as a name or a command, as in Alan Wake. That's important. Write that down. This guy we meet is named Pat Maine. He's not that important to the story, but his last name is Maine. Where is the most famous living author Stephen King from? Yeah, at the diner, we meet several people who will be important later. Rose, the waitress. What's her name mean? Well, it's two flowers. Flowers are pure, beautiful things. What is Rose gonna be? We've got this ranger here too, Rusty. Rusty as in, has been around the block a few times, as in no longer a young man. There's these two old guys, one of them calls Alan Tom, and this old woman who's afraid of the dark. Back in the hallway, we get a key to a cabin that Alan and Alice are staying in from this creepy lady. All of these people will be important later. After we go out to the car and head out, we see a guy, Carl Stuckey, say that Alice forgot her keys. I think the idea here is that the creepy lady gave Alan a key to a different place, since directions to the place are included. This game takes place in 210. You'd think the Wakes would have printed out a map or something. The cabin is at a place called Cauldron Lake. What do you think of when you hear cauldron? I think of magic or witches. Do we know anyone who could be a witch? We find some books by someone named Thomas Zane. Remember when that old guy called us Tom? There's this picture of a diver on the bookshelf. This island is called Diver's Island, and the cabin is called Bird Leg Cabin. We can figure that the diver has something to do with the picture, but what about the name of the cabin? We'll come back to it. Alice mentions a local guy named Hartman who runs a clinic that specializes in helping artists. Alice and Alan have an argument about Alan's productivity, and then he storms off into the night. He hears Alice scream, but when he rushes back to the cabin, part of it is gone. Alan sees Alice in the lake and dives in after her. Fade to black. Alan does his namesake here in a car. I'd like to say here that we've been tricked a few times already by the game, and there's almost no way on a first playthrough to suspect a few of the tricks. Anyway, we find a page from Alan's next planned manuscript which he has no memory of writing. I really like this aspect of the game. The pages give insight to some of the side characters' lives or serve to foreshadow some of the things to come. As an editor and writer though, sometimes my brain goes haywire when it spots an error or a grammatical choice that makes me go, huh? So yeah, it's gameplay time. A lot of the first half of this game is running through the woods. Every now and then Alan comes across a radio, which has some kind of world building dialogue, but nothing that seems integral to the plot. There's TVs as well. There's this Twilight Zone-like intro to a show called Night Springs. Night Springs? Bright Falls? Do you get it? There's a few different episodes that you can watch throughout the game. They are largely like Twilight Zone episodes. If you don't know the Twilight Zone, go look it up. There's some classic episodes. Like this one with Will Shatner of Tech War fame who sees this thing sitting outside the wing of a plane, but when he warns the plane staff, none of them believe him. There's not much story relevance in these episodes, except for the fact that it's later revealed that Alan's first writing gig was for the show. I can only assume that all these episodes were written by Alan, as he's our main character. So let's talk about the enemies here before we move on with the rest of the story. The game's thing here is that you have to shine light on enemies enough to remove this dark shell from them, so that you can blast them, after which they explode in a shower of light. You can't go frank on them right from the start, which takes some getting used to. So what do these things mean? What can we guess about the story from this kind of battle system? Possession makes sense. There's something dark controlling these enemies, who, by their dialogue, seem to be regular townfolk. They also seem to be not entirely real or altered in some way, since they do not leave behind corpses. In front of the gas station, we are first introduced to the idea of missing time. This is very important. You know all these manuscripts that Alan doesn't remember writing? What if he wrote them during that lost time? And here we see our first other Alan TV, where we see Alan writing in a room, but the present Alan doesn't remember doing this writing. Could it be that Alan is remembering his own experience of writing his manuscript? And I think at this point that Alan did his writing during this lost time. We meet Sheriff Sarah Breaker here after Alan calls the cops. I'm not sure what Sarah is a reference to, but with a last name like Breaker, we can assume she's going to be a strong character. We get this important piece of dialogue here.
There's no island on Cauldron Lake, not since the big eruption in the 70s.
We start with a flashback to 3 years ago in New York. How much did this apartment cost? I mean, if Alan is a famous enough writer that he's known by sight, he's making serious bank. Dan Brown is super rich from his books, but if he sat next to you on a bus, would you recognize him? So the whole purpose of this flashback from a storyteller perspective is twofold. We see that Alice and Alan love each other and we're introduced to the clicker. No, not the Last of Us monsters, but a light switch that Alan used as a kid to comfort himself in the darkness. Back in present day, Alan's goal is to find Alice. I'm surprised he's not just hiring divers. We get a phone call and hear Alice on the other end, then a man who says he has her. He even lays out Alice's driver's license as proof that he knows where she is. After we get our quest to meet the kidnapper in the forest, oh god, not another forest, We meet that guy who runs the clinic for artists, Hartman. Alan decides he doesn't like Hartman's face and breaks his nose. Before any fallout can really happen, the greatest character in the game shows up. Barry Wheeler is Alan's agent and best friend. A writer's agent does a lot of the business side of writing for them. An agent is the one who sells a writer's novel to a publishing company. The first step after you write a novel is to start sending the novel around to agents, and hope to find one that believes in your work enough to pick you up. So Barry's last name is Wheeler. Wheeler suggests immediately travel. There's also the phrase wheelin' and dealin', which is certainly a phrase I feel like Barry would use to describe himself. Also, doesn't Barry look a little like Joe Pesci? I'm getting some My Cousin Vinny vibes from Fred Berman's performance as Barry here. Alan and Barry head up to a visitor center to get a key to a cabin at Lover's Peak, the place where Alan is supposed to meet the kidnapper. This poor boy Max has his foot caught in a trap. I hope nothing bad happens to Max. This is a game though. They never hurt dogs in games.
No, I would never do that.
So later it's night, and of course the darkness attacks while Alan tries to reach the kidnapper. We end up getting saved by the kidnapper and fight against enemies with him. His name is Ben Moth. I looked up Moth because it didn't ring any bells. Turns out it means either a cluster of trees or prostitute. I'll let you figure out what that means for Moth. After they survive the attack, Alan and Moth go at each other's throats because that's what characters do. Moth tells Alan that he needs the manuscript in 2 days or Alice dies. We spend the rest of the chapter trying to get back to Barry. On the way, we get another phone call from the kidnapper. He demands that we meet him at a coal mine within 2 days. We have a bit of a boss fight against birds. Why birds though? We'll come back to it later. We get back to Barry, but Alan's writer's block continues. Barry gets a call from Rose, who tells him that she has the rest of Alan's pages. But I don't think she's telling the truth.
Have a great day. Hope you come back soon. Welcome to the Oh Dear
Diner.
Good girl.
Alan and Barry head to Rose's trailer. The trailer park is run by this guy who tells us about the past of Cauldron Lake. He mentions that author we found books by, Thomas Zane, and he mentions someone else, Barbara Jagger. We learn that the two were lovers and that they both drowned in Cauldron Lake in 1970. These two are very important, and let's get their names out of the way right now. Barbara Jagger. Barbara Jagger. Imagine saying Jagger though with a different sounding J. Imagine it's with a Y sounding J. Barbara Yager. Barbara Yager. Yeah, Baba Yaga. Look at that. Oh, and look at this straight from the Wikipedia page on Baba Yaga. In Slavic folklore, Baba Yaga is a supernatural being who appears as a deformed and or ferocious looking woman. Baba Yaga flies around in a mortal, wields a pestle, and dwells deep in the forest in a hut, usually described as standing on chicken legs. Remember the name of that cabin? Bird Leg Cabin? Remember what the name of the lake is? I also found an old story about the Baba Yaga, where a guy, Ivan, blows a horn and the house of Baba Yaga is surrounded by birds. You can't make these kind of connections up. Anyway, on to Thomas Zane. Zane is hard. Zane means gift from God, and as we will see, that kinda fits, but it's not enough for me when everyone is so intentionally named. The only other idea I have is that the developers loved the Stephen King movie The Mist, which came out 3 years before Alan Wake. The lead actor in that film is named Thomas Jane. So is that it? I guess. I don't know. And it sucks, but sometimes that's the way it goes. Anyway, Alan and Barry go to Rose's trailer and Rose drugs them under the influence of the Dark Woman. Asleep, Alan hears a disembodied voice that he heard at the start of the game. It tells him that the darkness is wearing Barbara Jagger's skin. If you listen to the voice closely, you can hear that it's slightly distorted, as if the speaker is talking through a kind of helmet. When Alan wakes, he sees another one of those videos where he's writing. It sounds like that Barbara is making him write, but where or when do these TV scenes take place? I think it's safe to say at this point, those TV scenes are Alan's memories of his lost time. We keep finding manuscript pages that Alan has no memory of. It only makes sense that these scenes took place during Alan's lost week. Alan goes to get the car because he can't carry Barry's healthy body that far, but it looks like the trailer park owner called the cops. Alan gets shot at by the least fleshed out character in the game, a psychopathic Fed named Agent Nightingale. Nightingale doesn't seem to mean much, but I think it's another reference. It's the name of a song that appears on the soundtrack to David Lynch's Twin Peaks, which was a mystery drama TV show way ahead of its time back when it aired in 1990. The protagonist of Twin Peaks is a Fed himself sent to investigate the town of Twin Peaks, Washington. Question: what state does this game take place in? That's right. We spend the rest of this episode running through the forest while the darkness picks the cops off like Rambo in First Blood. Alan runs to a radio station. Nightingale shoots at him again and Alan runs again. There's really no reason for this radio station stop that I can see narratively. I guess they just want us to run through another forest. We end up going to the coal mine Moth wanted to meet us at, but when we get there he calls us and tells us we're now to meet him at Mirror Peak. More running through the forests ensue. Alan ends up meeting Moth, who has been talking to Jagger. Moth gets sucked away like Dorothy in Oz. Then the tornado of darkness takes Alan down into the lake. The episode ends with someone reaching a hand down into the water towards Wake. We wake up in Hartman's clinic. Take the H off Hartman's name and what do you got? Art Man. I don't know why Hartman didn't think of that in advertising. Hartman tells Alan that Alice is dead. We meet one of Hartman's clients, Emerson, who has no plot significance, but is a welcome bit of comic relief. Oh, and look who it is, our two friends from the diner. Their names are Odin and Tor. I shouldn't have to say anything about those names. These madmen tell Alan that he must go to the farm. They also call him Tom Zane. They were apparently rockers back in the 70s and 80s, but drugs and dementia have rattled their brains. Alan sees another one of those memories. He tries to write, but the writer's block is too strong. There's a disturbance downstairs, and it turns out that the Norse gods have staged a rebellion. Alan finds Barry and the keys to Artman's office. Alan finds his manuscripts on Artman's desk. Alan tries to get answers from Artman, but then the darkness shows up. By the manuscript pages, it sounds like Hartman was trying to use Wake to touch the darkness, or something. After a long section through a hedge maze, at least it's not a forest, we meet up with Barry and head to the Anderson farm. We get this bit of dialogue from Alan where he basically explains what's going on in the game.
There's something special about this place. The lake, it does something to the works of art created here. It makes them come true. But there's a catch. The dark presence, whatever that thing is, twists it to its own ends. That's why all of this is happening. It's using my manuscript to take over everything.
Barry wrecks, and I guess we have to go through a forest to get to the Anderson farm.
No kidding.
On our way there, we see that it's the diver from the cabin who has been placing the manuscript pages all over the woods.
I'm trying to deliver each page to the right time and place. I'm trying to show you how the story goes.
We also get this confusing TV memory where Alan has written himself into the script in order to save Alice. It seems that the dark presence was forcing Alan to write a horror story in which everybody in the town was to die. TV memory Alan says that he's going to get Thomas Zane to help him. When we reach the Anderson farm, we get the coolest fight in the game, where Barry operates the Anderson brothers' stage machinery, while Alan defends Barry. I mean, look at this.
God damn.
It turns out the Andersons wanted Alan to go to their farm so he could hear this record play. Alan and Barry end up deducing that the Lady of the Light in the song refers to Cynthia Weaver, the woman we met at the diner who was concerned about the darkness. Alan and Barry get drunk on the Andersons' moonshine while they wait for dawn. Now, one of the manuscript pages mentioned that an ingredient in the Andersons' moonshine was unfiltered cauldron lake water. The moonshine allows Alan to do a kind of spirit walk back to the night Alice disappeared. He sees that he was tricked into writing a story for Barbara under the illusion that Alice is dead and his story can bring her back. But really, the dark presence just wants to use him to become more powerful. The episode ends with Alan waking up to Nightingale's gun in his face. Our goal here is clear from the start: find Cynthia the Lightweaver. The problem is that we're in jail. Our problem is solved pretty quickly as the darkness takes Nightingale before he can really confront Alan. As I mentioned before, Nightingale is the worst character in the game. Why was he so hellacious about getting to Alan? His story is apparently fleshed out a bit more in some of the extended media, but in this game, Nightingale's motivation makes no sense besides him being a plot mover. Sarah, the sheriff, realizes Alan isn't crying wolf about all the things he's saying. Anyway, Sarah and Alan run off to get helicopter keys to get to Cynthia because they're taking a helicopter and Sarah knows how to fly one. Now, I'm not an expert, but flying a helicopter is no joke. It's incredibly expensive as well. You're looking at $30,000 to $40,000 to get a license. I can't imagine Sarah pulling that extra money in being a small-town sheriff, but whatever, it's a video game. This is probably my favorite episode. You wander around with both Sarah and a decked-out Christmas tree Barry blasting shadow people into sparks.
Did you call 911?
Guess that one saw the light, huh? You didn't like that one? A tough audience. Well, I got plenty more.
What are the Christmas lights for?
Protection, man. Like garlic against vampires.
Barry here reminds me of a forgotten 80s movie I saw as a child. This movie's called Little Monsters. It's a weird, gross-out movie for 9-year-old boys. Don't watch it, unless you like that. I imagine the Venn diagram of people watching this video and the people that enjoy Little Monsters for anything other than nostalgia are two circles that don't touch. Look at this part where Alan says he'll go investigate and the sheriff can stay behind.
We can't reach the gate's control box from here. We need to get to the other side over the rooftop.
I'll go. I'll open the gate for you once I'm across. You stay here in the light and cover me, Sheriff, okay?
Remind you of anything?
I'm a cop. I should go.
No, I'm going.
Anyway, of course you get to the helicopter, and of course you don't reach Cynthia from the helicopter. Let's get another one of those storytelling rules that we had from the last video. This one says, anything that can go wrong in a story must. Eventually, Alan gets separated from Barry and Sarah so that he can run through another forest. The helicopter crashes, but we don't see Barry and Sarah die. Another rule? So soon? If you don't see someone die on screen in visual media, they didn't die. Alan reaches Cynthia alone. She tells us about a place called the Well-Lit Room, where Alan can defeat the darkness. Oh yeah, remember all those messages you can only see with the flashlight? Cynthia put them there. This woman takes precautions. I like that in a person. On the way to the well-lit room, she tells us some stuff about Tom. Tom was a lot like Alan, a writer who the darkness tried to manipulate. Cynthia makes it sound like here that Tom is the author of the story we are in, but I thought Alan was the one who had written this story. This plot point is the most convoluted part of the story, but then again, if you think about some of the Night Spring episodes, they wander awfully close to the paradox territory, which is what I think the game writers were going for here. Tom and Alan's narratives are so intertwined as to be inseparable. One cannot exist without the other. Through a manuscript page, we learn that Tom wrote himself out of his own story in order to banish the darkness, but left a shoebox that would be immune to things written out of a story. Are you confused yet? Since this episode is named The Clicker, I wonder what we're going to find in the shoebox. After we reach the well-lit room, we get this bit of dialogue in the cutscene.
The page was autobiographical, a memory from my childhood. But I didn't write this. It was a page written by Thomas Zane. None of them were supposed to exist anymore.
This makes it sound like Tom is Alan's father, and it raises the question of if Thomas created Alan as a way to defeat the darkness. But Alan has been writing Zane as a character in his own story. So like I said before, their writings and fates are intertwined. One's existence or fate, or something, depends on the other's. After finding the clicker, which is apparently the way to defeat the darkness, Alan heads back to the cabin to give the manuscript a happy ending and save Alice. The final boss is this tornado that you fight with infinite flares. After the battle, Alan dives headfirst into Cauldron Lake ready to destroy the darkness. There's this very confusing scene where Alan meets his doppelganger, which is called Mr. Scratch. I don't know why Mr. Scratch exists. It's one of those things that other media apparently talks about, but why even include Mr. Scratch here? It does nothing for the narrative. Finally, we arrive at Birdleg Cabin, where Alan banishes the Baba Yaga with the clicker. Alan sits at the typewriter and writes Alice out of the lake. There's a little mystery ambiguity here at the end as Alan says something cryptic.
It's not a lake. It's an ocean.
There's also this shot of Nightingale looming over the town. Alan Wake has a pretty good story. There's a good deal of what's going on. There's Barry and Rose and the Viking brothers, who are the best characters in my eyes. But some of the characters fall flat. Alice isn't developed at all beyond a damsel in distress. And Sarah's strong, but what else? Where's her pizzazz or personal journey? And then Nightingale was a lost cause. As the game approaches questions of free will, it would have been fun to see someone like Nightingale really struggle with if he had free will or not. Imagine that he had been investigating the town for some time and had begun to learn about its secrets. Imagine that his father or mother had a terrible alcoholic past. Imagine his personal fight with alcoholism in light of what's going on in Bright Falls. Wouldn't that make for a fun story? And I don't know if I really like adding elements into the story just for planned media like Mr. Scratches. It makes for more organic storytelling if Mr. Scratches is introduced in the story that he actually has a role in. So, did you hear about Alan Wake 2? The nice thing about this big horror release this year is that it's not a remake. It's an original game with an original story in 2023. There's not really any information on the story at the time of this video, but I've got a good idea for a villain. Just take my idea for a story, Remedy. I'm okay with it. We can collab on Alan Wake 3. So after you play this game, go watch the Mothman Prophecies. Notice the connections. Embrace the tinfoil hat.